Starting recording. Good evening, happening live. We'd like to welcome our viewers from the United States and around planet Earth, especially in Phoenix, Arizona, where Peggy George is located and has helped us not blunder around Blab tonight without a recording happening. So my name is Wes Fryer, and I'm in Oklahoma City, where it is cloudy, humid, and still feels like tornado season. I am the Director of Technology at Cassidy School. I periodically interview my wife and get to post podcasts on speedofcreativity.org. And I am looking forward to a little bit quieter summer, although it's going to be full of work and projects. And I am joined, as always, by the almost Dr. Jason Neiffer, coming to us from Montana. What's going on with you, Jason?
Good evening, Wes. I'm joining you live from Missoula, Montana tonight, where we're expecting our first 90-degree day later this week. So that's exciting that summer is upon us, considering we almost froze overnight one night last week. I am the curriculum director and assistant director of the Montana Digital Academy, the public state virtual school in fabulous Montana, and also the tech-savvy administrator in residence for the Northwest Council for computer education. I blog at blog.ncce.org. And I'm excited about much of the news we'll be talking about this week. And there's lots going on. Obviously, we had the Google announcements last month. One of the things I'd like to talk about tonight is prognosticating, and we may need to get like a Karnak hat out and talk a little bit about what we think might be coming at the Worldwide Developer Conference, or as my nerdy iOS developer friends call it, Dub is apparently what they call the Worldwide Developer Conference in developer lingo, which will be happening in 2 weeks in California. There are probably upcoming announcements too related to new Android phones. So lots of exciting stuff happening the next month, and we hope to tell you a little more what we think might be happening as it relates to education.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump right into news. We're doing an oblique fact, but I fear that we may lose listeners quickly. So we'll keep you with bated breath, wondering what facts from their history and their lives Jason and Wes are going to share. We'll do that before we wrap it up. So why don't you just jump right into it, Jason? You have the mother load of news articles for this week.
Well, I found a lot of interesting philosophical things this week, and one of them I actually tweeted out and got some interesting feedback from other educators related to this. But there's a great article on Robert Scoble's blog, thescobleizer.com, related to why Apple is falling behind on a new interface, which they're calling spatial computing. And as Mr. Scoble describes it, that there's been 4 visible user interfaces in the personal computer era. The first one was text mode, think like the command line in MS-DOS. The second one was a GUI, or graphic user interface, and of course Macintosh invented it. And PCs ultimately then evolved to that process. The third being touch, largely with the introduction of phones and tablets. And he says the fourth movement in the visible user interface of the personal computing era will be spatial computing. And it's hard to really define what spatial computing is. You can find definitions on it. He quotes one that says, spatial computing is a set of ideas that technologies will transform our lives by understanding the physical world, knowing, communicating, or relation to places in those places. And the transformational potential of spatial computing is evident according to the definition he cites in the article. But the interesting piece about this is that, obviously he does take a shot at Tim Cook and Apple. Apple's been famous for kind of waiting on evolving technologies and then ultimately swooping in after those technologies have been tried and defined and redefined to create kind of an evolved version of that. They certainly did that with the personal computer. They certainly did that with the smartphone, and arguably they did that with the tablet as well. But he says they're falling behind in this. But what I think is interesting about this is not the Apple falling behind part, because that's a debate that I think will never be decided unless Apple just disappears, but rather that spatial computing may be a future computing platform that we may have to come to terms with in education. Spatial education, the idea of understanding your place in space and how things relate to one another, is something that is interesting to me as a former teacher of geography. That was something spatial cognizance, spatial education, understanding how space works was a very important part of teaching geography, particularly to the growing 14-year-old mind. And sometimes we'd have to, really get kids physically in or around one another's space to understand how spatial natures work. But technology can help us do that, or provides an opportunity for us to evolve in the way we interact with one another related to that space. Think driverless cars, think the way that we're starting to record things in a spatial way, that VR provides us not only the opportunity to see things in a three-dimensional way and create an environment that you can be immersed in, but then also it provides students the opportunity to record their surroundings to share with others, which is something we've talked about in past weeks. And so I can't really wrap my brain around this yet, but there's something here, I think, in the same way that, that touch has really changed the way we've interacted with computers. I think spatial interfaces, if you want to go that far, will also mean something as well. So does that ring a bell to you at all, Wes, or any thoughts about that?
I have actually scanned the article as you've given us that excellent summary. So I love geography too. So that was one of my majors as an undergraduate student. I love the way that geography, far more than place location, is about the complex web of relationships that, define patterns and phenomena and people and cultures. And so as I'm understanding this idea of spatial computing, we're looking at robotics, we're looking at drones, we're looking at VR, we are looking at cameras. One of the things that strikes me, I probably mentioned a week or so ago that we had a session called, Dreaming and Envisioning the Future of Computer Science and STEM at our school. And we brought Vinny Vrotny, which actually, I think I published, I'll have to put a link in. I published the audio recording of that on our website. And at Kincaid School, which is a phenomenal independent private school in the Houston area where Vinny is the technology director, they've had a chance to, really envision what digital literacy should look like and really what sort of the core pillars are. And so that's what strikes me about this article is it's a bold statement to say, replacing the touch interface is going to be spatial computing. They had included wearables as sort of a fourth genre or area of technology to be exploring, which they haven't done a whole lot with yet. I really think that in school, and I'll just speak for our school, we have not yet embraced the power of mobility. We're still thinking about being tethered to computer labs and being, in the classroom for our experiences. And there's all kinds of reasons why we probably will continue to do a lot of that. But the opportunity to take our computing devices not only out and then also just bring, recordings bring life in, because students have devices and have that kind of capability. There are a couple projects that our teachers did this year. One of our Spanish teachers in 8th grade did a series of skits that the students had scripted, but some of the scenes, they shot on their phones and they brought in. One of our French teachers has done a pen pal project through ePals with another school in France. And we were trying to use my favorite 360 panorama app for the iPhone is called Bubbly. I've used several different ones, and we were on the edge of doing sort of a virtual tour of our school with 360-degree panoramas that would be kind of stitched together with a geo map so that you could explore it, on a Google map and then click and do that. So I'm intrigued by it. I know that one of my to-dos for this summer really needs to be, and maybe we'll even make it for the fall, learning to fly the drone that I inherited from our former tech director. This is like a Phantom something drone. It's like $1,000 drone. It's awesome. And as a GoPro, I have not flown it yet. And of course, I probably need to be flying drones that are a little less expensive first to get my feet wet with that. So I'm intrigued by the idea. I'm not sold on this, that it's another interface. It kind of seems to me that this is a hodgepodge of sort of mobile, transformatively different experiences and ways of perceiving things. When we throw VR into that, and they talk about General, what was the robotics company that Google bought? They mentioned that in the article.
Boston.
Yeah.
Robotics.
I mean, certainly the impact of computing in the Internet of Things and in a variety of devices that don't look like computers is a huge part of the future. And so perhaps that's what they're getting at with spatial computing too, is that we're going to see we're going to see computers in so many different places. And for next summer, we had to cancel it. We didn't get our stuff together. We're going to do a STEM Institute at our school. And part of it is, like I've never played with Arduino. I've never done that kind of coding and being able to put, an embedded, inexpensive computer, that does something, that does some kind of a task. So I'm intrigued by it, but I definitely need to learn a little bit more about it. And some of this gets overblown too. We did purchase a number of the Google Cardboard plastic versions, and with the hope and promise that, this will be so great to do these virtual field trips. Well, a lot of those videos are like a gigabyte in size, and the practicality of having students do all that in advance and not just buying, touches, or you really have to have a pretty high-end recent phone or, touch device in order to realize it. So I feel like some of that is a little bit, it's very sexy to see on a video. If you're trying to practically do it with students in the classroom, we're not quite there yet. But some of those things are coming to just iPad. And I don't know where I heard this, but like Nearpod, maybe you told me about this, it was Carl Hooker. Nearpod has some 360-degree panorama virtual tour stuff that's integrated within it. And so you're not having to put on a special headset, and do it on your phone, but you can get, we have iPad carts in the library and things that we can check out. So I don't know. It's definitely on the cutting edge, and that's a bold statement for somebody to say it's the fourth user interface to.
Right. So, and you mentioned Raspberry Pis. Have you played at all with the smaller computers? Have you played with like a Raspberry Pi at all, or is that any interest in that at your school?
Well, I'm very interested, and we're talking. I mean, we're talking now about the possibility of starting to offer some high school computer science courses. We haven't had that kind of a track. We've been very traditional liberal arts, and there's strong interest in doing that. But the conversation about STEM skills and even computer science and coding can very easily extend beyond just, learning coding to, developing, code for Raspberry Pi, developing algorithms for drones, things that go into maker education and STEM education. So I would say we're on the cusp of some exciting things. There's a project an activity called Science Olympiad that we have done at our middle level, and at our high school as well. And our students have done really well in. And our daughter, Rachel, is going to be in 7th grade. She's going to be coming to our school next year, and I'm pretty sure she's pretty fired up about STEM and about all technology, and I'm thinking she's going to do that. So we're expanding on that front, and I think there's going to be more spillover effects in terms of courses and stuff. But that's the interesting thing about it, right? The maker movement, STEM, this thing, it's not just like here's a course, and we tend to think that way in academia. It's also like where can I have the space and the resources and the support to do a project, to not, even we've been talking about even being able to fail and then having the time to iterate and figure out how to do it right. And that stuff doesn't just happen inside the boundaries of a 45-minute or 50-minute class period. So anyway, yeah, we're grappling with that kind of stuff, but I certainly, feel like we're on the cusp of a lot of movement in that area.
Sure. Well, and I do think, and I own a Raspberry Pi. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd generation. It's been a great kind of nerdy project platform for me. So I've made a media center out of it. I've created a BitTorrent sync syncing server out of it. And not that I use those, I just made them because they were fun and kind of got my nerd on. And I think the prospect of that in a kind of a freer computer science classroom or project-based computer science classroom is pretty unbelievable. But that the other piece of this is that it's part of the reason why this is even possible is because we now have $10 Raspberry Pi Zeros, we have $20 Arduinos, we have $60 Raspberry Pis. And when I say $60 Raspberry Pis, I mean full implementation kits with everything included. And
now, what have you made with yours, or what have you done with that?
I mostly Linux-based like projects and tools. Like it's not and nothing I've kept. Like I just would do it. I amused myself and moved on. I made a virtual radio. Server is probably a strong word, but it had a component where I could press a button and it would start streaming Pandora. And then I could press a button and change stations. That was pretty cool. The BitTorrent sync server that would allow me to kind of create my own Dropbox of sorts, which is pretty cool. I don't know if you've played around with BitTorrent sync, Wes, but it's in fact, I might want to talk about that one in the Geek of the Week, because it's basically roll your own Dropbox that uses the BitTorrent protocol to sync between two machines. It's unbelievable.
That will certainly qualify as a Geek of the Week. That'll be a Geek Squared week of the week. Yeah.
And that sort of stuff has been really where I've been with it. And I keep thinking to myself, if I were in a classroom with students, or if I had a lot more free time, it wouldn't be hard to come up with, and maybe to the point of the spatial computing stuff, like, creating Internet of things that move, right? Or that rove around, or that have a physical component to them, which I think is pretty fascinating stuff. But yeah, they're pretty amazing platforms. And, and again, it's well under $100 per item. And, that adds up over a classroom, but for individuals in particular, I think it's a pretty compelling platform. So I think that there is a lot of application there.
That reminds me, have you played with Pirate Box or done a library box? Do you know about
No.
that? So we're just going to go far afield with this. Alan Levine is the one that put me onto it, because he did one called the Story Box. But basically, you buy like a $25 cheap Wi-Fi access point, and then you hack the firmware, and then create, and then you can have batteries that hook up to this thing, but you could be completely off the grid or whatever, and then you create your own, sort of Wi-Fi network USB thumb drive. So you put a flash drive into it, and people can leave files and share files or whatever. I don't know. I never really got mine to work, and one of the things that I had thoughts of at a conference was giving away my ebook and letting people connect to it and being able to do it. Anyway, that the BitTorrent sync reminds me of it. So, but isn't there all kinds of learning that happened from that sort of thing, right? I mean, creating something like that and kind of going down a rabbit hole with making a project or something, and that all of that kind of learning doesn't also necessarily fit into a rubric or reflected on a grade card. But that's the fun of the maker movement and the whole idea of DIY and tinkering and all that stuff. So,
yep, absolutely. And and I think that's where this becomes very interesting too. Well, the reason why I got into maker stuff in the first place, and this was 6 or 7 years ago, was when Make Magazine was doing you're taking old massive wooden radios and turn them into kind of internet-based radio pieces, and I think that's cool stuff. And you don't have to wire you don't have to wire anything that extensive into it anymore. You can go buy a thin $30 computer like the Raspberry Pi, or the many alternatives, including the Intel alternative that's available for that now, and it's pretty cool stuff. By the way, I do have a permanent home for my Raspberry Pi. We're going to turn it into a MAME box. So MAME is the multi-arcade emulator, and we're going to hook it up to the TV at work and maybe play a little old school arcade at lunch sometime. So that'll be awesome.
Well, for the holiday, which by the way, we're going to need to get an update here partway through on your Canadian adventure, because I've been thinking about that and want an update. But my sister and family were down from Liberty, Missouri, and we have the old school 80s arcade pub down in Oklahoma City. So yes, we were kicking it old school, playing Defender and Miss Pac-Man, and and I was and that reminds me of MAME, because when I had dabbled with that, this has been like probably 10 years ago, it was like amazing, because it was all these old Atari games and things that you're like. But anyway, that that also runs the edge of copyright with some of that kind of stuff, and
yes, it does.
It's interesting. So. All right. Well, I have a segue to my article from spatial computing. This is not a current news article, but I did find it via another article this week. And the title is NASA Adds Evidence to Mysterious Ancient Earthworks. This was New York Times last October in 2015. But truly, this is one of the most amazing Google Earth stories I've ever heard, because we're all probably familiar with the Nazca lines in Peru, which are these very mysterious sculptures that really you can only see from the air, even from space. But there's all kinds of interesting ideas that people have about aliens and things, and why would the early native peoples of South America have created these? Well, there was a fellow who was using Google Earth, and he was looking. I want to say it was in Kazakhstan, and he identified these structures, which are not insects or animals. They're crosses. There's something that looks a lot like a swastika, which actually that was a symbol, long before the Nazis appropriated it. And anyway, he found this on Google Earth, and then it's been verified, and they, have excavated some of them, and they're not, this was about 6 months ago, I guess, in October, or almost 3/4 of a year ago. Anyway, I haven't read more about it, but how amazing to use Google Earth in your house as an amateur. It's kind of like the amateur astronomers who, help discover the new Goldilocks area, region planets, or, some kind of near Earth asteroid or something like that that's happening. But really amazing tools. So, and a segue to that would be, how are we using those kind of spatial tools in school, right? I mean, I do not know anyone at our school doing some kind of a geomap project. I mean, other than the one I mentioned with France, where we were like, yeah, let's do a virtual tour and, hook these 360-degree panoramas up to a map. So I don't know, that's one of those things that I absolutely love. I love geography and all of those connections. And every time I've had a chance to kind of do a deep dive or even a little dabble into Google Earth, it just kind of blows your mind. And that's one of the things I've enjoyed about Google, events. I did a Geo Institute a few years ago up in Lewiston, Maine. Just love that kind of stuff, and would like to have more opportunities to dabble in that. Not that I'm going to be discovering something amazing, but being able to put photographs to the map and have automated ways of doing that, or, storytelling and all the ways in which, place-based stories overlay. I think there's lots of rich connections to be made there. So are you a Google Earth fan, or is that one of the tools that you're not working or haven't worked in as much?
I am a big fan of it, and obviously I haven't been in front of a class of geography students in some time, but one of the most exciting things about me for that particular tool was the ability to, really insert yourself anywhere. I mean, the world seems like a lot less big place when you can drop a little yellow guy onto a street in the middle of South Korea and suddenly get a sense of what life is in those locations. And it makes a really big difference when you can create a, kind of a almost three-dimensional environment where you can see what the ground looks like in the outskirts of Rome, where you can see the location of a current event. You put yourself on the street corner where there was a tragedy or a bombing or something, to get a sense of what something looks like, and that's something that really would never have any analog on the or in the face-to-face, or I'm sorry, in the traditional environment. There's no book that could do that. It really is a great part of that process. So I think it's amazing. These
are the Google goggles that we ordered and have versions of. And I'll do a shout out to Eric Langhorst. He was the one that had told me about this particular model, which is, a lot easier for kids as far as being plastic and rubbing off. But we have had some teachers, say, can we go to the Parthenon? Can we see Athens? And then being able to do it with their phone, and then having some students do that. So that's. Anyway, it's a challenge to think about other ways that we may dabble in that arena. And that's a challenge that I'm thinking about for next year as well, is how I can, with our busy schedules, bring some different learning opportunities, not just with different tools, but with different projects, that students could be creating, how we're going to do that at our school.
Yep. Interesting stuff. So the next article, speaking of immersive environments, that I found interesting this week, is ex-Googler slams designers for making apps addictive like slot machines. And then it points to an article by Tristan Harris, who's a former Google employee, how technology hacks people's minds, from a magician and Google's design ethicist, which I think is an interesting concept. Design, that there's a design ethicist that worked for Google at some point. But the basic idea here is that if you look at why a casino game is engaging, and the same things about casino games have been built into apps and the way we engage in places. And I think it's an important point, and actually leads into a presentation that I've done a couple times this spring that has gone over very well. And of course, this is a good time to remind you that both Wes and I do training for hire. We do birthday parties, bar mitzvahs, whatever might be available. This has gone really well this year. The name of the presentation was, You're So Distracted You Probably Think This Presentation's About You. And I went through some of the emerging research related to digital distraction and some of the ways that you can kind of battle this process. And this article really kind of hit home with me because it goes to the point of some of the steps that I've taken in order to battle my phone kind of taking over my life. And I talk about this one a lot with groups of teachers, but as an example of this, I turned off all the mail notifications for my work email. I've decided that I get enough email during the day that it really didn't matter anyways, but more importantly, at nighttime when I want to be, with my family or engaged in a hobby or speaking to my friend Wes about technology news, instead I was constantly, I get, beeps on my phone related to my email that wasn't very productive, oftentimes drew me into a late night work binge that was not productive. And by the way, if anyone emails you at 10:30 at night, especially in a contentious or complaining email, that's not going to be good if you answer that night. You should wait overnight anyways. But I've taken that stance now that I've done that with everything. I've turned off everything but the very critical notifications. I don't even get text message notifications anymore, except from a handful of people. And I've really taken that on as a personal commitment. One other factor is that we banned phones from our bedroom at our house. So there's no screens at all where we sleep. And that's also been an important piece of this too. But I think that's something that we have to remember to balance with. And I think it's important that we as teachers talk to kids about this, that if we're distracted by these technologies, the distracted 14-year-old may be a hopeless case. And, we want to be proactive in the way we're telling kids, yeah, we know this stuff is distracting, right? Like, let's not pretend it's not. So what is it that we can do to, build strategies in order to deal with those pieces? And so particularly the Medium article by the Google design ethicist, I think is a really great read and might give you some indication of why not only that we're inviting distraction into our lives with our cell phones, but also that we should battle against it and should do our best to help.
Hugely important, and one of these things that we need to be equipping ourselves as well as teachers with. And I think in the educational technology advocacy evangelist camp, we need a healthy dose of Gary Steger, of Luddite perspectives, of people who are going to question things and not just drink the Kool-Aid. So it's really vital that we recognize the power of these devices. And I'm struck about this regularly in my own family and just in our life, right? When we see how almost incapable we are to allow our minds to be idle without stimulation. We are going to be going camping this summer as a family. We did this 2 years ago, and we're going to be, I think, at 9,500 feet approximately up in the Colorado mountains for a week offline. And in fact, my wife just ordered her paper book. She's going to read the book called Our Kids. We heard, Fulghum, I think Robert Fulghum, speak at this PBS national conference. And he's the guy that wrote Bowling Alone, if I'm getting his name right. Anyway, she's planning to have the paper book, okay, because there's not going to be a screen to be able to read. And so I've known this for a while, that a true vacation today is defined by disconnection from technology. And so it's it's super important. So yeah, Jason, I got to figure out when I'm going to be able to see you and attend your sessions, and we're going to have to hang out. Maybe we should start plotting for next summer. We were talking about trying to do a Story Chaser oral history thing with Nancy, which was not going to, I wasn't going to be able to do it. One of our other Story Chaser people were going to be able to do it. But anyway, maybe we should chat about something because we don't necessarily need to wait for an invitation. We might be able to make something happen next summer. In fact, I want to take our family to Yellowstone. We can talk more about that offline later. But I do want to ask you, when do you refresh your sessions? Because you're definitely continuing to, you're not just doing the same stuff you were doing 3 years ago. So do you find yourself doing that over the Christmas holidays or all the time? Or when do you kind of refresh your new presentations? And then, how does that work for you?
I usually, most of my calendar is planned around 2 different events. One of them is, actually, it's 3 different events. The 3 different events that I'm usually consistently presenting at is NCCE in Seattle or Portland, and that's something that I've been, more closely involved in the last few years. Both conference planning and delivering sessions. There's also a Moodle Moot in Montana each year. And so usually I will team up with Mike Agustinelli, who's the instructional program manager at the Digital Academy, and we'll either premiere a presentation there that we've been working on for a while that we intend to take elsewhere at some point. And then usually I do a fresh presentation every year for the iNACOL Blended Learning Symposium. iNACOL is the International North American on Learning group. I just found out today that for the first time since I started going, my presentations were turned down. So yeah, quite sad. And unfortunately, I think I have to go ahead and play the sad trombone sound.
Look at you. Who needs Google Hangout, baby? Jason is high tech.
I know. So we had developed some fresh presentation titles for that. So, but yeah, we'll see. I think there is a continuum for me, and I do have 4 or 5 keynotes, I would say, in the can, and that if I need to do them, I can adapt them pretty quickly to make presentations. But yeah, I would say it's about every 6 or 7 months or so, I'll introduce awesome. 1 or 2 That's presentations awesome. To the group. So, all
right. Well, it's okay if I do another article. All right. So this do. One, there's actually a brother of a high school classmate of mine. His name is Davi Ottenheimer, and he's presented at Black Hat, and he is a white hat hacker, and both he and his brother, phenomenally smart guys. In fact, I'll never forget, this was in probably 1987 when his brother, Fawn, wasn't able to print a document. And so he brought a floppy disk into our senior English class and attempted to turn in his floppy disk to the teacher, who said, Anyway, that was like guy before his time. Anyway, it's kind of fun because he'll sometimes retweet my stuff and I'll see what he's doing. And a lot of his stuff has to do with security. And I'm, continuing to read all kinds of interesting things about our security state. This article is a new one. It's from May 31st, from yesterday, from agweek.com, one of my regular spots to always get news. And it's that the North Dakota UAS test believed to be the world's first. And I don't know why they didn't call it a UAV, but this is like a 12,000-pound drone that instead of, flying over the Middle East or, Latin America or whatever, we are seeing it used in the United States to, at a very granular level, photograph and document fields so that they'll be able to, use them for even more biotech, specific biotech applications. When we lived in Lubbock, Texas, we moved to Oklahoma about 10 years ago. One of our good family friends worked for Monsanto, the seed company, and sadly, and he's not working for them anymore. One of the things he would do for them was basically try to help cotton farmers snitch on each other because they had, patented the seeds that they were developing that were Roundup ready and all this stuff. But talking to him, I mean, it's stuff that just blows your mind because at that time, this was a decade ago, all of the planters had GPS on them and were very precisely putting down a specific amount of fertilizer and a specific amount of seed or whatever pesticides that they needed to maximize their yields. And so they were using satellite imagery to do this. And so anyway, this use of the UAV, shows a crossover where we're not just talking about the military application, we're also talking about, in this case, agricultural applications. I went ahead and put a link below it that I had found, again, through your recommended Note to Self podcast, but this was actually a Radio Lab show from June of 2015 called Eye in the Sky. And this was some guys who came back from the Middle East working for intelligence services in the United States, and they were looking at how constantly flying drones can have a huge impact on crime. And they were trying to get contracts, and I think still are getting contracts with large cities. They were doing things down on the border in McAllen and, right across, the border with Mexico. And one of the things that they could do is when somebody had called in a crime, they were able to use the drone that not only had live footage, but it had the archived footage. And so they could just like you do a security camera, just ratchet back in time. And so there was an example of a female police officer who was ambushed and killed, but they were able to see exactly where these vehicles came from and, where the Jefe's, spot home was. And, anyway, it was having a big impact on crime. But when it comes to privacy, when it comes to, the whole Edward Snowden effect, where we're much more aware of the ways in which our government is monitoring our behavior, and we have the desire for civil liberty and to preserve this amorphous thing called privacy. It's interesting, but I thought that was significant. And again, with the EdTech Situation Room, if we bring it back to the classroom and the schools, how are we even touching these issues from an ethical standpoint, but also from a skill standpoint? I'll tell you one way we are here in Oklahoma City is through one of our community colleges, Rose State College. It's just, by Tinker, east of town in Midwest City. They're hosting a series of cybersecurity workshops for students as well as teachers. And there are federal grants for this. And part of that whole thing is to try to help kids get aware of and then oriented to coding and STEM careers, because we need another generation of cyber warriors on the military front, but we also need that within business, because again, the Internet of Things means you can now hack our houses and all kinds of things like that. So pretty cool article, and kind of an eye-opening thing to think about that basically military class drone flying over the fields of North Dakota.
Yep. Well, and it gives you a real sense too of that we're on the verge of sort of pretty amazing stuff regarding that. The miniaturization, the inexpensive nature of these technological evolution change everything. And it's funny because this was 10 years ago, no, 12, 15 years ago now. I was a teacher in residence for a grant program to train future rural teachers related to technology. And I actually spent one night talking with a professor I was matched up with, his class that was about, it was part of his natural horsemanship program at one of the rural universities in Montana. And I spoke to some of these issues that every single industry, and what I specifically talked about that night was mesh Wi-Fi and GPS technology as it related to farming of all things, was going to change a lot of how we interact with those industries, whether you're talking about large scale or small scale farming operation. And it's interesting to see those things come to fruition.
One more add on to that, I'll try to drop the link. EdSurge has a nice podcast series, and they were at some kind, I don't know if it's the White House Maker Faire, they were at some kind of Maker Faire interviewing folks. There were people from NSA and the security agencies, trying to recruit cyber warriors. And what they were talking about needing are smart kids who can figure stuff out and solve problems, and computational thinking. They didn't use that word, but we really need to find ways in school to celebrate the hackers, celebrate the kids who can, like you said, take an Arduino and make a radio and be able to make things and figure things out. And that is not what we've traditionally done in school. We traditionally think about, doing our times tables and memorizing states and capitals and reading Shakespeare. I mean, we're not celebrating to the degree that we really need to, the ability and the which is a cultivatable skill, right? It's not just there's some, innate desire to do that kind of thing and tinker, but that needs to be something we're very intentional about celebrating. So we're seeing stuff kind of outside of schools, but we're not seeing that mainstream focus on it. And I'd love to, anyway, maybe interview some kids and just amplify a little bit more what's happening with that, because it's not that I'm trying to, get everybody to go work for the NSA and become part of the security state. But frankly, that is an important part of what we're going to need more of is emphasis on the smart geeks that can use their knowledge and skills for good and not for evil.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Wes, we've come to that time in the program where I'm going to ask you to put your Karnak the Magnificent hat on and try to guess what will be happening in. There we go. That looks very good. Apple has announced, again, their Worldwide Developer Conference on June 13th, so just 2 weeks away from that particular event. And a lot of interest this year about what Apple might be announcing. It's been interesting to kind of watch them evolve since the Tim Cook era started. So, Wes, would you like to take a stab at what you think might be presented at the Worldwide Developer Conference?
My hope is that the second generation Apple Watch is going to include FaceTime, and we're going to be able to, do video conferencing from the watch. Sometimes I'm a little more attentive to the rumor blogs, and I haven't been in the last week or so. I don't know that we dropped the link in, but Apple just announced, I'm pretty sure in the last week or 2 weeks, a similar thing to the Amazon Echo, right? That it's a Siri-like device in the home. So Google has one and Apple has one as well. Maybe this gets into the spatial computing side, but I had a chance this weekend because my sister and husband have a new car to play with CarPlay, so I don't think we're going to be seeing, Apple announce that they're going to be doing a car, but the whole spatial computing side of things to dovetail off that first article that you shared, and Apple's sort of, it's not a mantra, but their modus operandi or whatever sometimes tends to be, and I think large companies can sometimes do this, is to study what others are doing and then try to iterate better on top of what they've done before. So I think they're going to continue with the wearables. The Apple Watch hasn't been the revolution that people have thought it would be, but at the same time, it's one of these technologies that's going to evolve, and we've said this before. People are probably like, why is this broken record, still going on this podcast? But we're becoming cyborgs. We're tied to our devices, and we feel incomplete without them. So I definitely expect them to continue iterating on the wearable side, and hope that it's going to involve, more video and some things like that I would see as directly applicable and useful for my life. And frankly, that I can justify to my own spouse the purchase of the Apple Watch. But what are your predictions?
Well, it's funny. I do not know anyone. Actually, that's not true. My friend, who is an iOS developer for Nike, he has an Apple Watch, but I think he excused it because he felt like he needed to for work. But I would say the two things that I'm really expecting some movement on at WWDC is, first, I do think that Siri will begin to evolve again. I do think it's been stuck for the last 24 to 36 months, and Alexa proving that there could be some kind of market for this that wasn't perceived or envisioned before, plus evolution in Google Now, I think is a potential interesting part of the process. That all is something that I think we'll see some headway on, and I think it's right. I think Siri has been a bit stuck in the last I would say 18 months or so, and it could use some updates. The other thing that I'm pretty sure is going to happen, and if it doesn't happen this year, it's definitely going to happen next year, is I do think that Apple is going to figure out a way to add touch to the MacBook line, and I don't see it happening like with an iMac, although that would be interesting with the 27-inch high definition super 5K display iMac to have a touch. interface, but I do think on the MacBook Pro, the MacBook Air, and then the MacBook that they will at some point, and it's not even hardware. I don't think hardware is the issue. I think that it's how do you evolve the OS to utilize touch in a meaningful way. Windows 10 does a fairly admirable job, and mind you, that's a 2-time iteration over Windows 8 to make that happen. But I think at some point it's inevitable that Macs will have a touch interface, and they have a ton of experience from delivering the most successful tablet platform to making that touch possible. So there's something there. I don't know if this is the year, but I would also expect at some point to get some evidence of touch. They'll also introduce a new version of OS 10 as they're doing yearly now. Although to be quite honest, I like the 3 versions ago one and the one now, cosmetic differences. Like I don't feel like there's been a lot of really advanced feature sets in recent versions of OS.
Here's what I'm going to be real interested to see if they'll alter course on, and that is the trajectory of their 3 laptop models, right? As of a few weeks ago, I'm now utilizing a new 12-inch MacBook, which is the 2-port, and I'm using it now. I have my VGA, USB, and USB-C adapter, that's plugged in over here, so I can be in power, and then my microphone's plugged in, and then I've got my headphones or headset, earbuds, whatever, and the other one. We have been at school using the circa 2012 MacBook that was the pre-Retina but built-in DVD player device, and putting an SSD drive, as we've talked about before, makes that thing lightning fast. And we're on the edge of saying, okay, for new faculty and new teachers that are coming in, are we going to go Air? Are we going to stick with MacBook Pro? However we go, there's no built-in DVD. Or do we take this jump to a MacBook with this, USB-C connector, and then, or do we think about iPad Pro? I mean, it's really kind of confusing, and reminds me a little bit of pre-Steve Jobs return days when Apple had so many different product lines. I really thought the MacBook Air was going to disappear. I don't know whether it's Apple hedging their bets, because they're always ahead of the game with stuff, right? I mean, they took the floppy drive out early. They have done all kinds of things sort of before the industry was ready. I think, I don't know, a lot of our teachers probably still need more peripherals. I don't know, a lot of them, I mean, the majority of them have smart boards available. We're starting to get more into some Apple TV and some AirPlay and things like that. But I don't know. Yes, I'm interested in the Apple Watch. It's a little bit of, do I need that? No, I absolutely don't. But we do need to figure out what path we're going to follow for our next refresh, which won't be actually this summer. The next big refresh of laptops is going to be in another year. But the jury is out for me on which way to go with our teachers, and I'm interested to see where Apple goes with that as far as their laptop lines, because I don't know. Obviously, they must be selling a bunch of all of them. Otherwise, they would discontinue one of the product lines. But I did hear, I think on the Clockwise podcast, they were talking about, people's disappointment that in the latest rev of the MacBook, it didn't have touch, and it didn't, it just got a bump basically, but it didn't substantively change in form factor, and Apple didn't drop it either. So anyway, I'm curious to see what they're going to do with that, because that has immediate implications for us as an IT department in terms of what we roll out for teachers, and what we kind of declare as the next standard. One of the things that's also complicated is our power supplies will all change, right? Because Apple has a different power supply for all of these things. So at this point, it's been nice to sort of to be standardized on that 2012 MacBook, and everybody's got the same power supply. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So we'll see, and we can come back to these predictions in a couple of weeks and see what happens. I do think. Oh, the other thing I do expect to hear more about is there was a lot of advancements on educational management and educational application of the iPad in iOS 9.3, and so I'm wondering if there will be any other efforts there, or if they're if they'll save that for another event, or what's happening there. So very interesting, the direction we're going into. So,
all right. Well, I think we probably need to do our oblique facts. I don't know that that's the best name for this corner, but the B-side fact, the non EdTech news related thing. You have something in mind for this?
Sure. Yeah. I as I mentioned last week, I did go to Canada for the
Right.
3-day weekend. My wife and I drove up. It was about a 4.5-hour drive from Missoula to Cranbrook, British Columbia, which I kept calling Cranberry, including to the border guy. And he kind of looked at me sideways. And pretty quiet, sleepy town. And, we were kind of looking for quiet and sleepy because we were looking to rest, but had an opportunity to hike around Fernie, British Columbia. And we went scoping out hot springs north of Cranbrook. Unfortunately, the one we found was way overrun with locals. So we could only dip our little toes into the hot water before we got kind of crowded out. But a great trip, nice weather. And actually, the one thing I was most curious about is that you hear stories occasionally of crossing over the U.S. border and back related to laptops. And I know I've read some articles that people on business had crossed a border and on the way back had their laptops searched. And I was most curious to see if that was going to happen to us. And they didn't even ask us. So we drove there and back for no reason, no national security issues. But I was curious to see that was going to happen. So, not that, finding my, ripped DVD collection of The West Wing on my laptop would not be that interesting. So sadly enough, but so that was our trip this weekend, and nice
awesome. Well, my little fact for the podcast is I visited, we have chapel at our school, and we have 2 different Episcopal priests, and the Museum of the Bible is an amazing new museum that's going to be opening in Washington, D.C., about 3 blocks from the Air and Space Museum in the U.S. Capitol in November of this year. And its headquarters is here in Oklahoma City. And a couple weeks ago, I had a chance to go to a men's conference with a friend in our Sunday school class who works for them. And anyway, he got their curriculum for us. So I've passed that on. It's on iPad, and then there's, printed versions. And so I got to meet with our priest today. So ended up talking about travel in the Middle East, and I've been listening to podcasts. And so I was reminded we were talking about the power of travel. When I was 12, I went to Turkey and was in Istanbul and had a chance to take a 2-week trip, really all over Western and Central Turkey. And man, talk about, geography and the connections to history. I mean, I just remember coming back from that thinking, like, we have almost no history in our country, right? 200 years is just nothing. And I don't know, our full family doesn't even have passports. We've talked about needing to get those to be ready to be able to travel. But, the crossroads of history, and there's so much happening right now in the Middle East. So anyway, little fact about me, and I would love to be able to introduce my children to international travel in that same kind of way, because nothing kind of brings history alive, than being in what was Constantinople, now Istanbul, and all, where the Byzantine Empire was, in the Saint Sophia or Hagia Sophia, and, which was a Christian cathedral, and then, converted to a mosque, and the overlay of literally hundreds and thousands of years of human history. Cool stuff. So that was probably longer than I needed to be, but there's your oblique fact about Wes tonight.
There you go. So let's go ahead and do our Geeks of the Week, Wes, and then we'll call it an episode. I had found out a week or 2 ago that Snagit for Chrome, which was a screen capture and a screen recording software, a plugin for Chrome, was no longer being supported by the makers of Snagit, and so that leaves that plugin to eventually die on the vine here. I've actually been a big, and by that, it's TechSmith is the company that makes that particular product, and we're a site licensee for Snagit and Camtasia Studio. They're both critical learning tools in our perspective at the Digital Academy. But they have announced that they're kind of shifting focus and taking support away from that tool. The other one that's interesting is Nomia, which is a popular tool, as is ScreenChomp on the iOS platform. Both are going away, sadly. But I did end up finding two alternatives. I do spend quite a bit of time on a Chrome platform, and those alternatives for me were Screencastify for video, and I know I didn't put my link in there, but Awesome Screenshot is the other Chrome plugin. So if you were using the Snagit plugin, which was very well done and a great piece of software, there's an alternative now. So feel free. There are great alternatives available. They've always been around, but great alternatives for you to utilize if you're using those tools.
Awesome. And my Geek of the Week is similar in that it is an app that is continuing to evolve, not going away, but it is Adobe Spark. And I have been a fan of Adobe Voice as an amazing digital storytelling app. One of the challenges is you can't, kind of like in the early days of VoiceThread when you could use a single account in the classroom and everybody could log in, but then they changed it. You can't do that with Adobe Voice. Every child has had to have their own email. So that presents some challenges if you're not using Google Apps and giving kids emails. But they have basically, sort of migrated Adobe Voice and with Adobe Spark, you can still create slideshow videos, but you can also do web pages and posters. And it's one of the things that I'm going to be exploring and then utilizing in July when I do another iteration of iPad Media Camp. Very excited to see that they have built-in Google authentication. One of the goals that we're going to continue working towards at our school is a almost single sign-on environment, which we do not have yet. And there's still, 3 primary important emails and passwords that staff and faculty have to be keeping track of. So anyway, I look for that in tools, but powerful for students to be able to take images and and also have a library of images, because that's another thing that can take so much time if you're going to create digital stories is finding the images. So Adobe's done a real nice job with those tools, and I'm glad to see them updating. And I also put a link into Mike Petty did a little tutorial about using Adobe Spark to add text to images, kind of like info pics, as Tony Vincent calls them. So a good project and something that, again, in our visual world with needing to utilize media, these are good things to be able to create and ways to think about weaving those into classrooms as projects.
And I think it's important to applaud Adobe, even though we're a bit frustrated at the Digital Academy with trying to license those tools in a virtual school context, and we could talk about that in detail for another night. I do think they've done an excellent job in the last 3 years of creating excellent app-based tools that they're releasing largely for free to the community. And I think that's going to keep them relevant in an era where people may choose not to utilize Photoshop because there are great alternatives available for $10 in the App Store that do just as much with a touch interface. And so much love and applause to Adobe for their evolution in recent years to kind of evolve their products. So great stuff.
Awesome. All right, well, I'll say where I'm at and where you can find me, and then if you want to take us out, I am on Twitter at WFryer, and I am blogging sporadically at speedofcreativity.org. I continue to update my Twitter profile from time to time to figure out why, it's like TMI. There can be too much information with too many different places, but I will be this summer again doing some iPad media camps, and so we'll be tweeting from that Twitter account a little bit and updating curriculum and things like that there. But most excited here in June to go down to iPad Palooza again and be able to go down there with my wife, who I'm very excited that will also be a featured speaker, and then headed to ISTE. So those are going to be fun things, and we'll have to take a look at our schedules and see, because you're not doing ISTE. Is that correct, Jason?
That's correct. Also denied from ISTE this year, so I'm a multi-time loser to the national
I've been the super loser for ISTE for years and years, and somehow the planets aligned, and I got 3 accepted. I've never had more than 1. So yeah, I don't know.
Awesome. Well, my name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director, Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy. You can find me on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I am also the co-author of the Tech Savvy Teacher blog for ncceblog.ncce.org. And we record this podcast most Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, 2 o'clock a.m. UTC for those of you that are nerdy and have that calendar, UTC calendar on your desktop. You can join us live on Blab. We have you join the panel sometimes. So feel free to jump in at any time and feel free to talk about the issues of the day. Otherwise, this is posted at edtechsr.com. You can find us on the iTunes podcast library. You can find us on Stitcher Radio or wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. So please feel free to join us on a future episode of the EdTech Situation Room.